Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another FFTCG interview, and today I have a very special friend with me. He is the tank to my healer when we're playing Heroes of the Storm together. He is our world's representative, Collin So Fresh, the Collin Rupert. Collin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Hey, how you doing?
Awesome. I love that Baby Yoda shirt. Very nice. Nap is what I could use right now.
Everybody needs a nap at some point.
That's right, yeah, never hurts, just have a nap. So today, we wanted to talk about Opus XIII and kind of some early thoughts about it and everything that's been going on. It's been out for, 2 weeks now? 3 weeks?
Yeah, about that.
There. And then we had the Zanarkand Open tournament on Octagon last weekend, which, Collin, I believe you took top 8, top 4? I know you were in the top 8. How far did you get?
5 through 8. It doesn't matter. It's the same number.
Oh, I gotcha. Awesome. And so I think you ran like a kind of a Sophie-based deck to start through Swiss, right? And then you switched to something else when you made Top Cut?
Yeah, I did like a 3-color Sarah Sophie variant with Wind. The only Wind cards were actually just like Althea. There was like 1 copy of Earthwind Ashtola, and then like there was 2 copies of Alexander. 4 CP summons. So essentially the whole reasoning for the deck was like I was able to drop down like Althea as like my 5th backup with like 2 earth and 2 water, and then like if I had Shantoto out, I could like loop Shantoto, or potentially I could loop like Sarah into like multiple fight scenarios to where I could like if I had to kill 2 forwards, like I was able to do that. It was definitely like a neat list. I really don't have any regrets about a lot of the card choices. Like I kind of like thought maybe I could have changed like maybe like 1 or 2 things, but like overall it wouldn't have changed the consistency of the deck. Like essentially you still had like the Sarah backup to like tutor for your Avelia or Princess Sarah to get your backup line straight, and then you also had like your Agrius to like combine with the Avelia to deal or minus 7k to a forward, and like then if you had to, you could just like Sarah and like finish it off with like a fight or something. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any regrets about that list other than the fact that like maybe I didn't run it in the top 16.
Do you remember why you switched? Like what made you? Because you went to like a fire kind of March Ritz variant, right?
I did. Yeah, I did. At the time, like it was a combination of a lot of things. Like looking back on it, I probably shouldn't have switched from like a tournament perspective, because like it's never really a good idea to like just to switch a deck that you're doing well with.
Sure.
A part of it was I wasn't really looking at the tournament as like, oh, I'm just gonna like try and win this thing and like take all the prizes and be like, oh, it was more of like a learning experience. Like I wanted to play a lot of different scenarios, play a different deck, help me solidify like some of my card choices, some of my experiences like playing, because like you just want to play as much as possible when a new like set comes out.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're just not going to have those scenarios in your head for like when you're playing against like the harder matchups like Monks or Icewind, for example. I mean there's so many different decks out there now. I think now that we're 2 weeks in, there's so many variants that playing as much as possible against every single one of those different decks is just a healthy mindset to be in. So it wasn't like I was trying to go and have a set strategy going in and just play one deck and that was it. I wanted to have the availability to play like multiple decks, and that was so great about that tournament was the fact that it was free. You're able to switch decks if you really wanted to in Swiss, which I didn't, because I wanted as much experience with one deck as possible.
Sure.
And then I knew top 16 was going to have a bunch of tough players, and I really wanted to see like how Mono Fire would do, and I decided to play Mono Fire.
Nice. No, that's awesome. So, you mentioned Sophie. I guess we'll just go ahead and get right into her as one of the first cards we'll talk about here in Opus XIII. I don't know about you. You're a Worlds player, so you probably evaluate cards like on a much more consistent level than I do. But that was one of those cards that I read it and I understood what it did, but I didn't really like consider how that would work. In my head, I compared it to Necron, because I was like, oh, it deals damage at the end of your turn, like Necron. Well, Necron was slow, but, because Necron was garbage comparatively. Sophie, I didn't appreciate just how easy it was to get that ability online, and it draws you a card. And so actually playing against this deck was like, wait a minute, why do they always have 5 cards in hand? And why am I dying passively? And why are they all like 12k? And why... What? You just like curl up into a ball crying.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about Sophie.
So the very first day I read Sophie, I was kind of like in your court though. Like for, looking at it, it doesn't you don't understand how it applies to like the rest of the current sets that are out. So like nobody really, I didn't really think about like Fenrir at all as a summon to go with it. I didn't think about it being a monk so I can get it back with Ursula. You weren't thinking about these things when you're like, first reading the entire set because like, there's so much to think about, obviously. But the thing that drew me to this card initially, as like the days past the release of the set, was just basically the ability of the end of turn effect. So like I figured like, hey, if I'm gonna like build a Sophie variant, obviously I want to be able to play like multiple forwards in a row, have it sit there and like deal my opponent a point of damage and draw a card. And end of turn abilities have always been like sort of like a thing in FFTCG because like you've had cards like in the past, like Kadaj, for example. Like obviously they're very different cards, but like end of turn ability, like blink it out. It's very powerful because now if my opponent didn't do anything in my main phase 2 and got rid of it, now it's just like coming back in at the end of their turn. They can't interact with it. So it's like that type of mindset, like Ash, the wind forward.
Yeah.
Like you're drawing a card after you play 3 cards. Also a very different card, obviously, but like it's very hard to just interact with that ability. You just played 3 things, got a full board, and now you're just drawing an extra card to replace what you already lost to play the board. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, like it's an end of turn ability. If they don't interact with it and it's huge as a forward, like 12k, 10k, that's hard to deal with. 10k is like the new like forward norm, especially in this set. So like not having that removal to get rid of it and just like drawing a card to replace whatever you lost to play the forwards, it's a very powerful like tempo swing card.
For me, something about Sophie is Sophie to me is the first example of the idea of these dual elements being truly broken. And what I mean by that is that because of what she is, she's a 2CP earth and water forward. She now benefits from both Lena and Fenrir, like you said, whereas in the past, Fenrir was stuck to just his earth forwards. Lena is stuck to just her water forwards, but Sophie and her best gal, Sarah Mobius, these are 2 cards that now benefit off of both the Lena effects and the Fenrir effects, and so out of these dual element, that was the first time I was like, well, that's kind of crazy, because like I don't think they, intended that design is that, well, no, Lena gets back water characters, and Fenrir gets back earth characters. Oh no, these 2 are both, and they get back both, and then she counts for both. It's just like this crazy combination of just abilities. It's like, holy cow, man.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I go back to this saying, like, even from previous opuses, like, if you're not exploring or playing with these new cards, you should be, because every single set that is released, there is some kind of, like, unintentional or intentional power creep in the set design. So you're going to have, broken things like that come into play where you're not really sure where it fits, but now all of a sudden you have to build a deck around it, and you have to evaluate, okay, like how good is this deck versus like the decks of old or the new decks that have been polished to supplement the new cards and their strategies. So like you should be looking at the new card pools. You should be looking at packages, and by packages I mean like obviously Sarah, Sophie, what cards work well with that package, build your deck around it, that type of thing. So I mean, obviously things are getting crazy because like now that we do have these dual element cards that are in their colors, we have to sort of explore like 3 color variants. So that, I mean, that was kind of what I did with the Zanarkand Open deck, the wind, earth, water. And
you dirty Althea player, you.
Althea, by the way, has just gotten more busted.
Yeah, that card was ridiculous when it got printed.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about a busted card, I mean, that card has just consistently been just overpowered.
Yeah.
It's so good in like every wind deck it's played in, and I can't imagine playing a wind deck without that card. So
yeah.
And the obvious factor is like it's searchable with Northstalin, which is the other like 1.0 best backup in the game. So I mean, it's just
why? Who knows?
It's crazy. Yeah.
So we'll get
so
back.
Like,
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, you've basically with this set you've set a new standard of like cards that are just staples in the builds that they're played in. Like in wind decks, you're always gonna have like your 3 Northstalin. In water decks, you're always gonna have your Sarah. Yeah. And obviously Sarah is the better backup because you're able to search more things. But
I was going to say, speaking of Northstalin 2.0, Princess Sarah, we'll just jump right to her. That was the other thing about the Sophie deck is, at least all the ones I would play against, it's like, oh, they're also on 5 backups on turn 2. what?
Yeah.
Because they would, Sarah, and she can search Princess Sarah or search as Kolka or search as Claris, or she's just got so many targets, like, beautiful amount of artwork on that card. But that was when I think the moment people saw it, they're like, oh my goodness, there's a bunch of targets for this. I mean, she's great in Dragoons because she can search out Alice, she can search out King of Bermesia. Like, at her worst, she just searches out another copy of herself. Like, card's crazy.
Yeah, that card is probably the best card to set, in my opinion. I mean, just in terms of like your backups, I mean, it takes so many variants and pushes them over the top in terms of your building schematic. Because like when you're building decks, you're thinking, okay, like I have my forward packages. I know what I kind of want to run. Like, here's my backup package. What do I add? Now I'm just adding 3 of this card no matter what, because it's just so consistent. You want consistency when you're playing. You don't want like inconsistency, because like that doesn't help you.
Yeah.
With your game plan.
Yeah, she's great. Okay, so we're going to move away from water for a second. A card that has kind of surprised me is the Alolan Emperor. He was our fire lightning guy, and originally I just kind of put him in my cadets deck just for color fixing, just to have a because cadets is freaking 3 colors. Yeah, they're still struggling with that one, the wind, fire, and the lightning. So I was like, well, okay, he's these 2 elements to throw away for CP. But not only have I used him to good effect, I've seen a lot of other people. I cast a couple matches yesterday, and everyone was using him. It's just like, especially on damage 5, he's pretty good. He can usually be, he'll remove 2 bodies when he comes in. So I kind of undersold this card when I first saw him. I was like, well, he'll be good CP fodder. I'm like, oh, he's actually pretty decent.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the ability to have a 9K with the ability to just kill a free card that's relevant. I mean, think about all of the 3 drops or less that are in the game that are just so good, especially Sarah Sophie.
Yeah.
It really clobbers and beats them up a little bit. But yeah, on damage 5, he's just obnoxious, how good he is, because you're just able to get bop bop, kill 2 things, and then potentially just swing in with the rest of your forwards.
Yeah.
So later in the game, when the game's actually fair and it's not so one-sided where you're not just absolutely getting crushed and beat up by your opponent, Alolan Emperor certainly fits that role nicely, where you're able to just stabilize and come back and kill their main strategy. So
yeah, he's been a nice surprise. So someone I know we both think, and probably anybody thinks, is obnoxious, and he's just been a big pain to deal with, and that's the White Tiger Lassie Nimbus. And we've seen him in some of the Sophie decks, because some of them have leaned into an ice variant, and I've seen him in just typical Earth Ice decks. I mean, he's just so strong. A lot of these new legends we got this brand new idea of okay, not only is it an effect on entry, they're now going to threaten to do it on attack every turn. And this guy, probably his best attribute is that he's brave. So you can never even just go past him. He's always just going to be there as a big chonky blocker. Come on, what you got for me?
Right. And if you're thinking outside the box, alongside not Ice Earth specifically as a deck, you're always thinking about, okay, now how are we going to cheat him into play? And people have been running Dusk alongside of him in the Sarah Sophie variants. I've also seen a different list where it ran the 7 CP Phoenix that was able to just deal a K to a forward, bring back White Tiger LC, freeze something. That's pretty powerful. Even though Dual Freeze is a mechanic, I think in one of your other interviews, we've pretty much evaluated Dual Freeze is kind of a old Opus 1 through 4 kind of practical approach to the game, but it's not staggeringly increased in power level as more sets have been released, because sometimes you just don't care about your opponent's forwards being frozen, because maybe you're playing a deck where you want to take damage and you just want to not have that card frozen at the time. You want them to attack you, or you want to bait them into attacking you and fueling your own strategy. Or sometimes the Dual Freeze just doesn't matter and is applicable in certain games, because your opponent is just going wide and flooding with 4 forwards, and you may not have an answer to all of them because you don't have Shantoto in hand. Now we have Dual Freeze cards in our hand. Maybe we'll Dual Freeze 2 of them, but they're going to be the most powerful attackers, but it won't have an impact on the board state, because the other 2 forwards have some kind of attack effect, or they have a pump, or anything could play out in a scenario if you can put your mind to it. But
and with these new ice cards, they've leaned into that. They now Dual Freeze characters pretty much universally. Almost all the new ones will Dual Freeze a character. So the Tiger, even if you don't have a forward, it's not his effect just fizzles. He's coming after your backups. He's going to take your CP out.
Yeah, and I definitely think of White Tiger as like kind of like a very good like mid-range play. You're able to you're both on three backups or something, and then like you cheat them in some fashion, or you just hard cast them. You put them on two backups for that turn at the very worst. Even if they have a forward in play, it's not specifically bad for you because like you've played a very powerful forward. It's 9K. It's going to be tough to beat. You've disrupted their CP chain, so potentially if they don't have that 2 CP backup or they want to play that turn, and they're just playing the forward game, like you're just baiting them into using more CP that turn to play that card. So White Tiger LC fits very nicely in those games where like you just want to play that medium tempo like board state, make it harder for your opponent to like, just overall use their CP effectively. So I think of it as a combination between like the old Garland 9 of the set and
From Opus 8, yeah.
yeah, from Opus 8, but just on a whole different like power schematic.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting to see a card like that power creep itself, into the new set. But it is nice. It fits a role nicely in a lot of different variants, and
Yeah.
I'm really happy to see how well it's doing.
Thank God they put that backup restriction on it, because that would have been really bad if you could just like play him whatever. So at least,
Oh
again, like
man,
you said,
yeah,
you gotta like either try to cheat him in or you have to play him off the backups. No, he's
yeah.
great. So I don't know if I've seen a lot of people use this in like the Zanarkand Open, any of the competitive games, but playing a lot of the casual games I have on Octagon, I have absolutely enjoyed Charlotte. Charlotte is exactly what I want in a magnet card. So there was a Cecil from Opus 1, maybe Opus 2, and he was like a 4-cost 8K, and he had the same effect, whereas anytime your opponent had a summoner ability, it had to target Cecil. And I just never really liked that card, and I think it because it was too pricey. But Charlotte is only 2 CP, and it's been so fun to watch her just disrupt my opponent's moves with like, oh, I'm going to take out your big four. It's like, you got to target Charlotte. And then at damage 3, she gets 2,000 power, and she takes 2,000 less damage. So she just becomes this cool little magnet, and I was playing against an opponent the other day, and they had like their Tyro out, and like they're like, combat, oh, I'm gonna buff my forward. I was like, hey, thanks for buffing Charlotte, you have to choose me, so I'll take that ability. Like,
Yep.
she's just such a cute little card, and I think because she's so cheap is what's made her so fun to use. Is even if they get rid of her right away, it was a really cheap magnet, and it protected one of my other guys. Like, I've really loved using that card. Have you used her at all? Have you seen her? Or?
I have not used her. I have seen her. I have seen a bunch of different like ice water variants where she's being played, specifically with the new Celestia.
Yeah.
Obviously, she's great with that because like, you're just baiting your opponent to like target the Charlotte, and then obviously you're dole freezing something because they just targeted Charlotte.
Yeah.
that's pretty busted. I mean, that's a good board state to have. So I will say like tax decks have never really been my thing. And what I mean by tax decks is like baiting your opponent into like using something that they don't want to on something else, and using more CP than they really want to for that turn. Just because like from a competitive standpoint, I think the game has progressed to a point to where it's very difficult for the tax decks to do impactful things unless you're playing a very fair game. And I don't know what it is, but I feel like in some of the matches that I've played in the competitive scene, it's been like the games are very like tempo oriented. They're very non-swingy. I haven't had the most experience playing a fair game midfield, as with some of the other variants, especially since like Sarah and Sophie has been a thing, because like it's a very tempo deck. Like you're just like removing a bunch of stuff, playing a bunch of forwards, and then like passing the turn, dealing your opponent damage without even like thinking about attacking.
Yeah.
So like it's been so hard to like look at that package and then evaluate a card like Charlotte and just be like, okay, like how does this apply to the current meta that we've seen in the past weeks? So I'm not outside of the willingness to try Charlotte. I think it's probably a really good idea to play it in a certain build. I just I haven't had a chance to like really explore like ice water or like ice water earth like variant outside of Sarah Sophie. So it's a card that definitely interests me. I think it's actually very undervalued. I think it's better probably for in a draft environment.
Oh yeah,
it's
it's
because
the draft.
Yeah, just because of the ability, like your opponent doesn't really have a lot of like removal. It's more like targeted stuff. So like she obviously was probably going to shine in there. So but I definitely be willing to try it out and see what a build would look like with her specifically in it.
I don't know if she'll ever be competitive, but man, is she just fun to use. So
Absolutely.
you mentioned Celestia, so we're just gonna go right into her. This is
Sure.
one that when I read it, I thought this card's gonna be great, and playing it, it's like, yeah, this card's pretty great. Man, she's one of those ones that like, you better hope you have some damage-based removal, because like I ran into it with Dragoons and something else that had like a lot of straight breaks. Like I think I did my 15 deck, and it's like Nyx and all. And it was just like, oh yeah, none of that works all of a sudden. I was like, what? And then if you dare choose them, your board's getting dull frozen. Like, what? Like again, and maybe this is another reason I love Charlotte so much, is I actually got to face it with my own Charlotte, so I could freely choose anything they had. It was like, go ahead, you can dull freeze Charlotte 1,000 times. Like, you got to. But without that, man, Celestia can be a pain. Like I said, if you've got fire, maybe it's not as big a deal. But if you've got straight breaks, if that's what you're relying on, like, you're in trouble when that card comes down. It can
Absolutely.
be a pain.
I mean, it basically has that like White Tiger LC ability on it, just without having to attack itself. You better have more power than your opponent.
Yeah.
When you're facing that card, otherwise you're just not going to win the board state against it. Like all of your stuff just becomes like, your cards just became harder to cast.
Yeah.
You're using more CP on things that you don't want to, and you don't know if it's going to have like an impact on the board versus that card, because like now you're dulling freezing 2 backups just to play like 1 card to get rid of it. I mean, you've lost some kind of advantage in that scenario. So like, I definitely like Celestia as a forward. I've been exploring different decks, or trying to explore different decks with like Sarah Sophie variants, where I'm actually playing like maybe like 1 or 2 copies of it, just to have like something, to protect them from just straight break abilities. Like obviously, like there's a lot of different things that break. Your Sarah Sophie, you have like Odin and Lightning, the 3 CP that breaks draws of cards. So like it's just great at like nullifying that type of scenario where like you have to keep your forwards alive longer than long as possible. So
I don't know if this is true or not, but Chris Adams from the RVA, he kind of suspected that Celestia might have been one of the reasons Guido got banned, because there is this card now that literally says you cannot break my water backups anymore, as long as I'm on the field. So it's very possible. Yeah, and again, because she covers the whole field, like it's not just herself, which she would have been bad if she did that, or it's not even just her forwards. So I've like fought against her as an ice player, and it's like, well, shoot, I can't even dull freeze her backups without her like dull freezing me in return. Yeah, she's a pain, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually surprised. Like I've seen like different builds with her in them and played against different players that have been playing it, but I haven't seen it as much as the other cards. So I'm definitely interested to see how, moving forward in the current meta of decks, like how people are going to be using her effectively. I definitely think though that she's probably best in like the Sarah Sophie builds, if anything, just because you have access to like Earth in some fashion. Like maybe you could figure out a way to like increase her power in some fashion other than Princess Sarah or Tyro, that type of thing. So like there's a bunch of different things that need to be explored. I'm definitely excited for that card to be popping up in more in decks.
Yeah, for sure. So a card that I wasn't sure how good it would be, and I've gotten to see how great it is the new Cadet Legend that's 9. He's fantastic. Now, the problem is Cadets, I think Matisky said this on one of the NA pages, it's like they purposely try to make them bad. Like, you really want Wind Fire more than anything else, because most of the Lightning stuff isn't good, other than, like, Elrisha being the Searcher. But 9 is great. He really is a good card, but he's in Lightning, so, like, you're still almost forced to do this, like, tricolor stuff, so... They haven't quite gotten him there yet, but like the new 8 has actually been pretty fun. Testing out the new cadets, he does like, again, that power reduction on both entry and attack. You get this big board of cadets. I don't know if they're still there yet, because again, they're still suffering from that cadet problem of color locking. But he is a cool card.
That's always been the issue with cadets. The color fixing is just not quite there yet. I mean, I think with 9 being printed, I think it probably helped. Especially if you're gonna like splash in like Alolan Emperor, for example, like you were mentioning earlier. So there's cards to supplement, I think, that problem, but it's funny because like those cards kind of like take away from like the whole like cadet scheme. So like you're right, I mean, you're just stuck in this weird like catch-22. Like you're screwed if you do and you're screwed if you don't type scenario. Like, but I think that especially with the deck that I think was posted in the NA page with like the Japanese list for the cadets, that just happen to do well. I mean, it's still a very powerful and prominent deck,
Yeah.
and can still take your opponent off guard, especially if they're not prepared to face it or they don't have the resources in their hand to deal with like the free play of just like popping a 9 into play, and all of a sudden like you're facing down 3 forwards with like new forwards on your board. So, I mean, it's still a very relevant strategy.
Yeah.
It just depends on like, I guess, a bunch of different scenarios, like what deck you're playing, like how much removal you have, how well you're able to deal with the cadets. Because like Shantoto is probably the like universal Earth backup to deal with that deck,
Right.
but it's not guaranteed because like they have cards like 7.
Yeah, they actually have a chance to cancel it.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to interact with it or not interact with it, depending on what the matchup is.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely happy they're giving more cadets to the deck, and I keep saying this to myself, like they're always just one more cadet away
Right.
from the deck being absolutely bonkers and busted.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's the thing. They have a lot of really strong forwards, and for the first set in a while, they didn't release an ace or a rem. Thank God, because that was the other problem, is they would just name clash to the moon and back. We actually got a new Cater, a new 9. I think they've got the power. I think they just need something to make them more consistent. I don't know if that's like a backup that says your cadets can be paid for any color or something along those lines, but like, yeah, if they just need some consistency to finally break through that wall.
yeah, let me clarify. Maybe they need a new cadet that probably isn't one of the named ones.
Right,
They already
exactly.
have pot the pie, so the pot, as they say.
Okay, so we'll stick with lightning a bit here. Behemoth K, which was our lightning legend. This one was kind of weird. This was the card I had to read it like 5 times before I truly grasped what he did, because I was like, so wait, he does damage when you block? No, okay, that's only damage 5. When you attack, no, okay, when it's he attack, like it was just so specifically worded that this is when I had to read a lot. I was like, oh, okay, your forwards break. Oh no, wait, no, your forwards break. Okay, so any forward break, and so had to read him quite a bit, but I've seen him a lot. I've seen people using him. He definitely does give me that Astinian feel of like, hey, this guy's coming in and I'm either going to like kill 2 of your guys or I'm going to hit you twice kind of thing. But he seems to be effective, at least in the matches I've seen him. Have you gotten to see him much?
I actually, but it hasn't been the kind of card where I've seen like people just running like an auto 3 of and like maybe like a mono lightning variant or like a wind lightning or whatever splashing lightning at the time, lightning fire even. Obviously like the card's great with like haste stuff, so like lightning fire is on the table. The card's great in like mono lightning, obviously, because it presents itself as a new like Astinian, like you were saying, like potentially just giving it haste, and lightning's all about haste, so like that's a threat on the table as well. I don't know what it is about that card, but it hasn't impacted, I think, the games as much as it probably could be. I don't see it as like a 3 of include in like even just a mono lightning deck. I would probably only run like maybe like 1 or 2 of it.
Yeah.
Just because like it's a finisher, and it's 5 CP, it's expensive. I don't think the power level matters as much. I don't think the blocking matters as much, because like obviously your opponent like probably won't block it if they're ever in that scenario where they think they can overpower it, but like most scenarios you just can't. So like they're never gonna block it. So I think that ability is kind of like off the table in a certain sense, unless they're like absolutely desperate, But it's just like,
oh, go ahead.
It's not the kind of card where the power level matters anymore, necessarily the ability matters anymore. It's all about just dealing that extra point of damage. So in a sense, it's kind of like that. What was that fire forward? Archangel? Yeah. So if you're just viewing that card in that aspect, it's very powerful. It's a very good finisher. But if you're viewing it in terms of like all 3 of its abilities, I don't think it's as relevant in the current like meta that we're looking at.
That's a fair
because
assessment.
There's ways to interact and play around it.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say that is that he feels very dependent on what he's facing. I've seen him face a few decks that don't really have an answer for him, and he just rips them to pieces. He just as a behemoth, and he tears them.
Right.
But I've also seen decks that have a lot of summons, and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool, bye." Just instantly Diabolos or Odin or just something. It's like, yep, no big deal, he's gone. So I think he is kind of dependent on what he is facing against.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing a deck where it has a lot of coordinated summon break abilities, like Alexander obviously is a great card. Diabolos is still being played in like your Icewind variants. Like I mean, there's so many different ways to interact with that card that if you're pushing for damage, hey, I'm all for it. Like, it's a great card, but like, I don't think it is as impactful as probably like Sophie, for instance.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, and something I know that has been impactful, that this surprised me, and maybe I just didn't give it the proper valuation, but is the new Agrius. I don't quite know what it is about her. Maybe you can tune me. Is it the free draw? Is it the power reduction? Is it just the 9k body on Agrius? Is it all of that together? Like, what makes her so effective? I wasn't expecting her to be that good.
I think it's the replacement ability from you drawing. So like, that's on the table. So really, it's like a 3 CP, 9k. Yeah, of course, the minus 7k option is on the table because obviously there's a lot of forwards with like 7k or less power. The fact that it's in water, so it's automatically like combined with like Sarah Sophie variants and knights and like the Final Fantasy Tactics decks that we saw from the Zanarkand Open. Like, she's even cheaper because of Beatrix.
Yeah.
So now it's now it's just a 3 CP draw a card 9k, whereas it would have been much more expensive in like a Sarah Sophie variant. If you're playing that. Yeah, it's just an insane card, especially with like the 2CP available back up. Now you just have a 10k in play, and it's like, well, 10k is a new standard. Can you beat it? If not, it's going to deal.
Yeah.
It's going to push damage.
I think that was another thing too. When I evaluated, I didn't realize. I guess really appreciate the synergy between that Ovalia, the new Sarah backup to search out that Ovalia. So now this Agrius is just always online. It was funny. It's so funny that we got this new Ovalia legend, and like I haven't seen anyone use that. They're like, F that. I'm just gonna use the old one.
Yep. And I think that Final Fantasy Tactics deck is really just a surprise because you're in Lightning Water, and you have the ability to just search it out freely with Jurgen.
Yeah.
So that's what makes that card like especially powerful. And even if you don't have Jurgen, okay, yeah, it's a 3 CP and do nothing backup for the turn, but like inevitably starts drawing you cards as the game progresses. Yeah, your Agrius is not going to be 10k anymore, but now you're drawing a card when Agrius dies, and 9k is still a powerful body on the field. Yeah. So, I mean, you're just getting double value at that point. You're just replacing your Agrius with a free block. You're drawing 2 free cards, and you really didn't have to spend that much to do it. And as with anything in FFTCG, anything that's reduced cost or has the ability to be reduced cost to just gain CP advantage over your opponent, that's what the game and the math is about. So those cards are those specific scenarios and decks that work well with Agrius. I think that's what makes that card just a very powerful force to be reckoned with. It's not necessarily its read on ability for the card itself.
Right. Awesome. No, that's a great evaluation. Okay, so the one last card I wanted to talk about that was new to Opus 13 was one of my favorite cards, and that's Fischl, our Ice Legend. And so here's what I don't know, is how good the card is overall. Here's what I do know, which is what pretty much everyone knew, is that Premium Fischl Bullet is amazing. It's such a good special. But it's a special ability. So I've seen some people run like Earth Ice to like Kusith and just really recur that bullet and just because 10,000 damage on any forward, like you said, it's kind of the new standard, and it makes him discard, and she doesn't like have to dull herself or anything to use it. Like, the special is undeniably great. The rest of her, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's because it's the hand size limit. Like, and for me, I thought more people would favor the dull freeze, but like you said, maybe that's outdated. It seems a lot of people just draw a card with her when they're able to get one of her effects off. So, what do you think of Fischl so far?
So, as with any card that kind of like has its own like situational type effect on board or in your hand, but as with a special, it really just depends on like the situation and how well you're building around it. So like obviously Fischl is going to be better in decks that's going to have like better discard, like with Zidane, Argath. That's why it really did well in the Zanarkand Open, because like it worked well with the rest of the cards that were being played with it. So I definitely think Fischl is a powerful ability, but only in terms of the cards that you're running with it in the deck that you're running it in, and the situation that it's coming into play in terms of the board state. So like obviously Fischl is great early when you're low on cards. You have to overspend to maybe play it, or your opponent doesn't have as many cards in your hand. You're replacing itself with like, now you have a 9k on board. You just spent 3 CP to play it because you drew a card to replace the card that you discarded to play it.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's different situations like that where Physalis like kind of shines. I think that the longer it lingers, the more abilities it's going to have. It's kind of like it's Celestia, right? Because Celestia doesn't replace itself. Obviously, you have that tax ability on it to where it protects everything else. It makes your opponent's cards that are removable, seem not as good because they're dealing freezing in response to it. So effectively, your opponent is losing CP. But as for the card itself, it just sits there, and the longer it sits there, the more value it's getting. So I definitely evaluate Physalis in the same way. Obviously, very different card, but the longer it sits there and your opponent doesn't deal with it, the more resources they're using to like not play into it or break it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the better the card is going to become.
Yeah.
So, and I think we've seen that with different situations with Ice Wind. We've seen Physalis not being broken. It got more potential value as the game accrued, rather than a card being good on itself, just being played. So, I definitely think it's one of those cards that, going back to, the old FFTCG mantra where like a card is, just kind of okay by itself, but like it's just incrementally better as the game goes on, kind of like how Sephiroth is. Like, yeah, Sephiroth, made your opponent discard 2 cards right away, but like if we were back in Opus 10 or 9, where it's like attacking every turn, your opponent doesn't have enough cards to deal with it. Now all of a sudden it's doling freezing, you're getting a 3 points of damage. They didn't hit their EX burst. It's become more of a problem than what it initially started as.
Right.
So I kind of evaluated Physalis in the same aspect. It's more of a problem the longer the game goes where it's not dealt with, as opposed to it just being good when it enters.
That's fair. And I will say too, if the Physalis player can get them down to 0 cards in hand, which does seem very difficult these days, but if you do and you're getting the draw and the dull free, that feels crazy good. Now again, like, it's very tough. Even like I've played on decks with like Scale Toad. I don't know, it's just hard to keep an opponent's hand empty, but if you can, man, does it feel good to get both those effects off in a turn.
And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is it harder to get cards out of my opponent's hand? Well, the answer is very simple. We have so many cards in the game now that just generate value in CP when they're played that are auto abilities. So we're just drawing more, we're searching more, we're playing free things, or we're playing cards that are on a reduced cost. So like obviously keeping your opponent's hand to 0 is just very difficult, especially when you're trying to like, push in damage in a way that is generating value to you.
I mean,
and that's kind of what this card does. It generates value to you when you're attacking and when it's on entry. So I mean, if you're not really pushing for that aspect of the game in a situation that you're in versus the deck that you're playing against, then it's not going to be as impactful as it would be if they weren't they were actually playing around it. So
well, and looking at some of the core 3 of the Sophie deck, Sophie draws a card for her end turn. Sarah Mobius can draw a card on entry, just completely replace herself. Agrius can draw a card. So yeah, I think John Schreiner of the RVA has said this. People are just finding cards like out of their ears. Oh, there's a card in my lap. Like cards are just raining from the skies these days.
Yep, cards are being flown everywhere. Yeah, for zone, drawing, searching. I mean, it's just every once in a while, and they always seem to have it. So
yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Well, that's everything I wanted to mention for the new Opus 13 card. Was there anything you wanted to mention? Kind of some old cards that have risen to prominence. I know you kind of hinted at that earlier. Maybe like Ash or Fenrir.
Ash, Fenrir, and Althea are probably the big 3 that I've seen. Deal. Have an impact on the meta. Lane, the 1 CP summon EX burst, that definitely has become a lot more relevant just because there's so many forwards now that have, abilities that are relevant to the board. Maybe you need to, Lane a Ishtola for the turn and stop their ability to, stop your auto ability that you need to play and kill something. I think those are the big ones that I really wanted to touch base on. I mean, I think there's a lot of undiscovered packages in Opus 13 yet too as well. Like I think Laguna, Renoa, and Squall backup is definitely something to keep an eye out for, just because like they have a lot of powerful synergy with each other.
Yes.
And
I've tested that, by the way, and the Squall sucks, but he's just there for the Laguna. The Laguna is great. Like dull freezing 2 things is pretty brutal, and the Renoa is like on damage 5. Do you have an answer? Okay, well you lose the game. So
absolutely.
They
so
have
like
the potential.
Yep. And if you're playing against a slower, Sarah Sophie build, Laguna is great because like he's able to live longer. And like I said with Physalis and cards that deal something on attack, you're getting value the longer it sits in play. So being able to like have a double white tiger LC ability
Yeah.
on attack and still doing your opponent point damage and still getting a pump
Mhm.
on the forward itself. I mean, it's sometimes backbreaking, and
Yeah.
sometimes it swings the game in such a way that like you're just drawing so much and getting so much advantage that I mean it's very hard to interact with that once you're behind on the table. Yeah, I really would like to see a lot more potential builds with that, especially in like an Ice Earth build, or like
Yeah.
even if we changed the Ice Wind deck up a little bit and ran that package, see what that potentially has in store for it. I'd like to see more decks of that caliber. As with all of the new like multi element forwards and things, there's so many different routes we can take with building our decks. Not necessarily playing that established like tier one meta
Yeah.
deck. How do we build a newer deck that is tier one, but it can deal with a lot of the things that are, or may not be tier one, that can deal with a lot of things that are in tier one. So like
Sure.
it really just comes down to how intuitive you are with playing, knowing your deck, the knowledge of your plays that you can make in your discards. I think are the most important.
If anyone out there wants to experiment with Doga and Unai, I'm all for it. I'd love to see those summon packages. I mean, I know they've
Right.
never been like consistent, but they're just fun to watch.
Absolutely.
All those high rolls. Cool. Well, we'll wrap it up here, folks. I want to give a huge shout out and special thank you to my good buddy Collin. Can't wait to take on some more Heroes of the Storm with him later and experiment with all these new decks. Let us know, what do you think of Opus 13 so far? Was there a card we haven't mentioned that you've found really good success with, or maybe you've seen some cool combos that nobody else has mentioned? And yeah, just let us know, leave in the comments below, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Hey guys.